book thus provides a rare first-person account of Black life during this time period. Later breaks down the impact of movies that were known as Black audience westerns. Howdy, folks! Welcome to a special Black History Month edition of How the West Was Read. I'm Sass, self-proclaimed book nerd, history enthusiast, and digital creator of sorts, and I am your guide for this expedition. Today's format is gonna be a little different in that I'm going to discuss some mixed media resources which give us insight into the lives of African Americans on the frontier. The first is a book called Black Cowboys of the Old West by Tricia Martineau Wagner. In this book, Wagner gives us condensed biographies of the following men: JSTOR, Dart, Bose Ikard, Nate Love, Robert Lemons, Bill Pickett, Jim Perry, Charlie Willis, Daniel Webster Wallace, and George McJunkin. The second is a book called The Life and Adventures of Nate Love, better known in the cattle country as Deadwood Dick. This autobiography is invaluable because Love, like many of the cowboys in Wagner's book, was born into slavery, which meant he would have had little to no access to a formal education. His book thus provides a rare first-person account of Black life during this time period. Now, I don't want to give away too many spoilers from either book, but some of the interesting facts we learn about include that Bill Pickett, for instance, was famous for inventing the rodeo sport of bulldogging, which involved biting the lip of a steer to subdue it. Then there was George McJunkin, who came across a bone pit that would lead to one of the greatest archaeological finds in North America, and also Robert Lemons, who was so good at taming mustangs, he became known as a horse whisperer. And of course, there was Nate Love, who left home at age 14 to head west in search of adventure. His story takes us from days growing up on a Tennessee plantation, his journey westward, where he became skilled at breaking in horses, and had encounters with other legendary men like Buffalo Bill Cody and Billy the Kid, to the waning days of the Old West and the cowboy era, and Love's eventual occupation as a Pullman railway porter. Some of you may have heard of the novel entitled Lonesome Dove, which was authored by Larry McMurtry and published in 1985. The novel is the third in the Lonesome Dove series, which includes Dead Man's Walk, Comanche Moon, and Streets of Laredo. Now, here's a little spoiler for an upcoming episode. This Lonesome Dove series is what got me started on my Western literary expedition. Yes, sirree! I was so enthralled with all four novels that I said to myself, by God, I need to read more into this genre. Anyways, I digress. The reason I'm giving you this backstory is because I learned from Tricia Wagner's book that Bose Ikard, who was born a slave in Mississippi and grew up in Texas, is the Black Cowboy who was the inspiration for the Joshua Dietz character in the Lonesome Dove series. Like the real-life Ikard, Joshua Dietz is a Texas Ranger under the leadership of the fictional captains Woodrow Call and Augustus McCrae. Dietz is quiet, loyal, and well respected by his fellow Rangers, which was true of the real-life Ikard, who was the right-hand man of legendary cattle baron Charles Goodnight. Goodnight so respected Ikard that he often entrusted him with the large sums of money collected on cattle drives until they could make it to a bank for depositing. When Ikard died in 1929, Charles Goodnight had a special granite marker commissioned for his grave as a testament to their long-standing friendship. The period we know as the Old West coincided with America's Reconstruction Era. This was the time frame where the country, particularly the South, was trying to rebuild after the Civil War. The Freedmen's Bureau was established to enforce the newly granted civil and labor rights of former slaves. However, the Bureau's agents and the freedmen faced staunch opposition in the Confederate States. In this post-Civil War period, the Western frontier became a symbol of freedom, independence, and economic opportunity for men of all races. For African Americans, though, that symbolism was made tangible through the literal freedom that was granted with the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 and the abolition of slavery by the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. An article from the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education entitled Deadwood Dig in the Black Cowboys describes this allure of the Western frontier. Work on cattle drives was hard and dangerous. It was particularly attractive to former slaves who lacked training to do much else and who were lured to the West in search of white man's wages of $1 a day. Wagner's book puts it this way: Black cowboys in the Old West hoped to achieve economic opportunity and the chance to be treated with dignity and respect on the trail and on the range. They desired to be judged by the quality of their work and their acquired skills rather than by the color of their skin. Despite the fact that these men found it impossible to escape discrimination, the cowboys worked hard to make a living in the least restrictive environment to them. According to Roger D. Hardaway's article, African American Cowboys on the Western Frontier, it's estimated there were between 5,000 to 9,000 black cowboys working on cattle ranches from the late 1860s to the early 1900s. Mainstream media depictions of this time, however, centered the stories of white cowboys and homesteaders, usually in some kind of conflict with Native Americans and/or Mexicans, while omitting African Americans from the narrative completely. Hardaway's article explains that publishers had to print what their readers would buy, and since most readers were white, almost all fictional cowboys were also. Later, of course, African American cowboys were virtually ignored by those who made movies and television shows. All of this served to convince white consumers of mass-market media that there were no black cowboys involved in the frontier cattle industry in the American West. In my research for this episode, I was delighted to learn that there were African American filmmakers who sought to rectify that media omission of black cowboy stories. Singer-turned-actor Herbert Jeffries was one such cinema pioneer. The story goes that one day Jeffries was on tour in Cincinnati, Ohio, when he encountered a young black boy who was crying out of frustration because his white playmates would not let him play the role of cowboy Tom Mix because Mix was white. The encounter was the inspiration for Jeffries' singing cowboy character that he would go on to play in a series of all-black Western films in the 1930s and 40s. In a chapter from Julia Leder's book, American Mobilities, Geographies of Class, Race, and Gender in U.S. Culture, Leder breaks down the impact of movies that were known as Black Audience Westerns, which was a genre of race movie. As implied, these films were made by all black cast and crew, and were comparable to a Hollywood B-movie Western. In Harlem Rides the Range, Herb Jeffries plays the hero cowboy Bob Blake, and he, along with his sidekick Dusty, encounter a shady situation in which they must save a black homesteader and his daughter from being cheated out of their property. Now, while I did enjoy the film for the most part, just for the sheer novelty of seeing a black and white Western with an all-black cast, frankly, I was put off by the buffoonish characterizations of Dusty and the cook, another man named Slim. Their character portrayals were no different from Hollywood's offensive stereotypes of black characters of this era. Leder explains in her chapters that although these films were made by all black casts and crew, they didn't set out with an explicitly political agenda. Rather, the focus of the black musical westerns is on spectacle, music, and action, more than on the story, which is rather skeletal. The films were not only an experience for African Americans seeing themselves on screen, but the movie-going experience itself. At a time when most African Americans could not see a first-run Hollywood film except from balcony seats or at after-hours midnight rambles, black audience movies, including singing cowboy features, created an on-screen America in which African Americans had access to all locations in life, both high and low, and even in the saddle. I gave both Tricia Wagner and Nate Love's nonfiction books 3 out of 5 gold pieces for being solid, informative reads. I do have to admit that Wagner's book was rather dry, although she did try to liven up the narrative by going into details about rodeo events or cattle rustling exploits. My problem with the ebook version I read, however, was that it didn't appear to have an editor's touch. There were several capitalization and spelling errors that diminished the overall reading experience. I listened to the audiobook version of Nate Love's story, and that was much more enjoyable. I should tell you, though, that there are suspicions that Love most likely embellished many of his exploits, but it did make his story entertaining. Links to Herbert Jeffries' Harlem Rides the Range, as well as the cited journal articles, are available in the description box. I recommend the movie as a must-watch as well. If you were familiar with any of the cowboys mentioned, or have any other Western recommendations, mosey on down to that there comment section. Before I take my leave, I want to thank you for watching this special Black History Month episode. I'd be much obliged if you'd like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It is rough algorithmic terrain out there, and I do have a long way to travel. Don't be a stranger now. Until next time.